What are the differences between a British education and a Korean education? Are there differences? And if there are, what are they? And what are the difference between Korean students and English students, British students? Well, there's that controversial list, isn't there? There's this long controversial list for IQ by nation. And we're not really supposed to talk about it. IQ by nation. And when we look at average IQ by nation, then I think the top three nations are Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea. I'm not sure if I have that right, but I think I'm pretty sure that South Korea features in the top three, and the top three are Asian nations. European nations and Western nations appear a little bit down the list. That's always been interesting to me because of working in universities in the UK and working in the education sector in Korea. It's an interesting situation. Of course it is. What is the difference? Difference between the students, difference between the school children, difference between the culture, difference between the way things are done. I have to say, there are lots of differences, and most of those differences go in the favour of Korea, South Korea, and that's borne out by that list. But this is another thing, isn't it? What is IQ in relation to education? Because IQ is not education, and we're told that IQ is not, I think we're told that IQ is not affected by education. IQ is, I think, I may be wrong, but some people are suggesting that IQ is innate. There's very little you can do. It's in your genes. There are certain things you can do. I mean, emotional stability. I even read somewhere that breastfeeding helps a child's IQ. But it's your IQ, your intelligence, doesn't come from, or significantly does not come from, nurture. It's almost always from nature. Now, I may have that wrong, but this is just something I've read recently. And so universities don't have an impact, or don't seem to have an impact on IQ. Your IQ is already in place. By the time you take your exams, your IQ is already, you're at the level you're always going to be at. That's why you get child prodigies. They already have the IQ. Universities don't train child prodigies. Child prodigies are already child prodigies. But I'm drawn to, as always, we're drawn to our own experience and what we see. And I'm just going to talk about my own experience of the Korean education system. And I'll make other videos about this because it's actually, for me, it's quite fascinating. For me, it's a fascinating project. I think an education system in all countries is a fascinating project. How we choose things, the way fashion impacts education. For example, British universities. What was the number one subject? Pre-1980, I think the number one subject at British universities was English literature. I think so. Then Thatcherism happened, and actually economics became important. And English literature diminished a little, I think. It's still a very important subject, but it's now competing with so many other subjects. It used to be really, really important. Now, not so important. Economics came up. Then, more recently, subjects such as media studies and communications, a lot more important. Well, actually, of absolutely no importance, but the fashion dictates that they are the training de rigueur that people want. People want to work in the media, so media studies and communications are growing in importance. I think there's a couple of statistics. I think there are more law students in America than there are lawyers, and also there are more communication studies students in the UK than there are jobs in the communications industry. But it's growing. And nowadays, what strikes me as interesting as well about university life, or universities, or the opportunity to go to university, now people are questioning that, saying, is it important? But that's another topic. What I was going to talk about, essentially, was the life, or the effort of being a Korean student, and me questioning the idea that effort isn't a factor. I think effort is a factor. The work rate, how seriously you take education, that's an enormous factor in developing you as a person. And I was going to contrast that between the two countries, England and South Korea. In England, where I was growing up, in a sort of southeast London suburb of London, school wasn't championed. School was almost disregarded. It was not important to a lot of young people. It was seen as something that they really weren't engaged with. And in South Korea, that happens on a much smaller scale. I would say the majority of students in South Korea, I'm talking about middle school, high school, and you could probably talk about elementary school as well. The majority of students are fully engaged in school project, and that's rare in the UK, to be fully engaged. Some people, they're 40%, 50% engaged, but to be fully engaged in the school project, that happens in South Korea. It doesn't happen in the UK. I think in the UK it happens in public school, which is expensive. We say public school meaning private school, owned in the public sector, so to speak, not state school. In the state school, my experience, I went to a state school, very much the students were not that engaged in their school experience. But that doesn't happen here. In Korea, students... Okay, we'll go through some evidence for that. In Korea, high school students, middle and high school students will obviously go to school during the day. They will then, in the evening, go to hagwons and study centres and study cafes. So their school day is almost till midnight. They have a normal school day, and then they have an evening school session. A hagwon is an academy, a study centre is a smaller hagwon, and then a study cafe is somewhere they can go to study. And that's all geared up. Obviously, it's an industry. It makes money. The parents have to pay. But it's geared up to match the ambition of the student and the parent. And it's in place. It's these students being fully engaged. For example, you will get students who at the weekend Saturday and Sunday, will still wear their school uniform. They wear their school uniform at the weekends. They don't have school, but they go to school and they go to Hagwon, they go to an academy, and so their mindset is, I'm studying, I'll wear my uniform. And that always strikes me as it's just a sign to show that they are fully engaged. That doesn't happen in the UK. Students escape. You might say that's a good thing. Stress levels. I mean, in Korea there are high stress levels for exams and for school life. But going back to the notion of academies, we don't have academies in the UK, not to the same degree as here. I know some people are going to say, "Oh, there are academies. My children go to academy in the evening." Not to the same degree. You can't compare it. So my point is this: if we can discount nurture, it's just nature. I don't agree with that, because I think that being engaged in the project of your education, putting in so much effort, which is, I'm always impressed by Korean students. They really do put in the effort. Of course there are negatives, but looking at the positives, they put in this effort, they make progress, and they develop skills. And now I don't know if that has an impact on IQ, but they are in the top 3. And that effort, and I think putting more time in, spending more time at school, spending more time being fully engaged, that must have an impact. It must have an impact on your abilities, your skills, and your intelligence. I'm sure it does. And it's very impressive. Of course there are negatives, but in the students I meet, I feel they organise themselves very well, and I think they deal with the negatives very well. Stress. It is difficult, but they do deal with it very well. And the UK system, very different. I've not been in the UK system for a long time, so maybe I don't know. Maybe there are more academies nowadays, and an industry does develop around education. But on the whole, I think that in Korea, more efforts put in, and students are more engaged in the project of their own education, and that's really, really impressive, and that has a positive effect, a massive positive effect. So that's what I see anyway.